Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm really excited to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Bruce Feiler and Carter Cast. Thanks for joining us. FAN's concluding its 40th anniversary season this month, and we're honored to have had the robust support of dozens of schools, nonprofits, corporations, families, and individuals from across the country. We're committed to our vision of an informed and compassionate community, and will achieve that vision by presenting fresh ideas that elevate minds, expand hearts, and make the world a better place. We have nearly 300 videos of past events archived on our YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Bruce Feiler is one of America's most thoughtful voices on contemporary life. He's the author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, let's try to make it 8, the presenter of two primetime series on PBS, and the inspiration for the drama Council of Dads on NBC. His 2 TED Talks have been viewed more than 2 million times, and his latest book is The Search, Finding Meaningful Work in a Post-Career World, which was just published at the end of May. Employing a first-hand approach to his work, Bruce is known for living the experiences he writes about. His work combines timeless wisdom with timely knowledge, I like that phrase, turned into practical, positive messages that allow people to live with more meaning, passion, and joy. We first hosted Bruce in 2021 for his book, Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age, which describes his journey across America, collecting hundreds of life stories, exploring how we can navigate the growing number of life transitions with greater purpose and skill. And as you'll hear tonight, this book grows out of that work. He'll be joined by Carter Cast, our friend, our former board member, who is the Michael S. and Mary Sue Shannon Clinical Professor of Entrepreneurship at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. He was awarded an endowed chair in entrepreneurship in 2019. Carter has received the Faculty Impact Award 6 times, voted by his students, as well as the Sidney J. Levy Award for Teaching Excellence in 2018 and 2020. Carter is also an operating partner for Pritzker Group Private Capital, where he invests in and counsels growing companies. He is formerly the CEO of Walmart.com, and prior to that, the founding chief marketing officer of Blue Nile Incorporated, the leading seller of diamonds and jewelry on the internet. He's also the author of the 2018 book, The Right and Wrong Stuff, How Brilliant Careers Are Made and Unmade. He served on the FAN board for many years, and has been a beloved mentor to me in my role as Executive Director of FAN. And now let's welcome Bruce Feiler and Carter Cast.
Thank you, Lonnie, for that kind-hearted introduction. And Lonnie, congratulations on another amazing year at FAN. The programming is incredible. I honestly don't know how you all do it. Getting somebody like Bruce, speaking of which, Bruce, welcome. I have to tell you, when Lonnie asked me if I'd be interested in interviewing you and talking to you, I had just finished, I'm not kidding, like within a couple of days, I just finished reading Life is in the Transition and loving it, thinking it was so well researched and so insightful, so I jumped at the chance.
Well, thank you very much, Carter, for agreeing to this. And let me just add, first of all, a toast to FAN for 40 years of bringing together people like me and people like you, Carter, and everyone joining us here tonight. And I just want to tell a personal story, because I was actually scheduled, speaking of Life is in the Transitions, to be in person in Chicago at a FAN event in May of 2020, which got shut down by the pandemic. And then we scrambled and we went online and we did this virtual event. And in the course of that event, I think more or less right around then, I had sort of decided to do the project that led to the book that we're about to talk about. I shared that with Lonnie, and Lonnie sent me an email that she just loved this topic of how we all have nonlinear work lives. And though I've never said this to her or to anybody else, I left that email in my inbox for the next 2 years, on those mornings, inevitably, or afternoons or late nights when I worried that the whole thing was going to fall apart, that Lonnie, you sort of kept me company on this journey. And so I'm grateful for that and delighted to be here. And thank you, Carter, for agreeing to engage in this conversation. Well,
it's really my pleasure. I just finished the book a couple days ago, and I've written up some questions. The first one, if you can just give us a background, I'm going to read a couple quotes from the book, and if I can just ask you to follow up with what is happening here. You wrote, This book is designed to help you write your own story about work with the goal of helping people find more meaning through work. And then you wrote, it grows out of an unprecedented shift in how we think about what we do. Something is happening in work that has never happened before. What is it, Bruce? What's happening at work, in work?
I think the short answer is that workers, individuals, tens of millions of people across this country and across the world are saying they're not prepared to view work as something that makes them miserable. They want work that brings them meaning and fulfillment, joy, passion, whatever mix of ideas might motivate them at any given time. And this is a massive change in the history of work that we've never seen before. So with that sort of short answer to the question, I guess, I'll give you one more sort of headline of what I think is going on, which is that people are saying, no longer do I want to do what I should do. I want to do what I want to do. I'm tired of chasing someone else's dream. I want to chase my own dream. So that, I think, is the headline. Now I'll take a step back and sort of tell you sort of how I ended up in the middle of this conversation and sort of what is it that led me to that idea and to everything that we're going to talk about now. So as we've been talking, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and I left there and I went to New England to go to college. I went to Japan and I started writing letters home about my experience teaching junior high school in Japan. And when I got back home to Georgia, everyone said, I loved your letters. And I was like, great, have we met? And it turned out that my grandmother had Xeroxed them and they went viral in sort of 1980 sense of the word. And I thought, I should write a book about this. So I sold my first book. This is a rare story as we talk about work tonight, 35 years ago when I was 24, and I've never held a job since. So I've been wandering, entering different worlds, and wrote books about Japan and England, spent a year as a circus clown. I spent my 30s, as you know, going back and forth to the Middle East, as you and I spoke about before this call, writing books about religion and spirituality and that sort of changing landscape in America. And this, in the context of what we're going to talk about tonight, I think of as a kind of linear life. Like, I figured out what I wanted to do early. I did it for no money. I had some success. I got married. I had children. But then my life blew up in my 40s. I got cancer, as Lonnie alluded to, as the parent of 3-year-old identical twin daughters. I had financial trouble. My dad, who had Parkinson's, tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. And this was a massive disruption, right, in my life. And what I did in response to this was I didn't know how to tell my story, since you evoked storytelling. And when I did, and I found out that nobody else knew how to tell their story, that began what has now been 6 years of traveling across the country, collecting and analyzing what has now become nearly 400 life stories, all ages, all walks of life, all income brackets, all 50 states, leading first to Life is in the Transitions in 2020. And then when that book came out, in a conversation with my editor, more or less a week after it came out, I said, you know what, work is going to be the next domino to fall. And as Lonnie said, I went out and did it again and renewed this process. And the book that we're here to talk about tonight grows out of a series of very targeted conversation about what is your work story? How do you navigate disruptions in your work story? And how it is that you find what became sort of the big idea in this book, which is that fewer people are searching merely for work and more people are searching for work with meaning.
Bruce, you mentioned the word storytelling a couple times. It's a central theme in the book, and it's the tool, the excavation tool you used as well. What is the role that storytelling has specifically in our search for meaningful work?
Yeah, well, I think that this is a really important question that not enough people are asking. So if you go back, like the idea that our life is a story, right, which is now sort of everywhere in the culture, really began as a fringe idea in academia in the 1980s, in what became the field of narrative psychology. And it was really very much sort of discredited at the edges. But it's really come into the center both of academic life and, I would argue, sort of mainstream life, for a lot of reasons. First, a lot of thought in the academic space, but also because we can now through neuroscience, we can now access the brain, and we understand that the brain is wired to tell stories. But for whatever reason, Carter, and in some ways you might be better off able to answer this question than I am with your distinguished, career both in business and in the internet, and now in business thought. The idea that your work life is a story has never really caught on. It's never really moved into the mainstream of what we might think of as either work or or career studies. For most of the history of how we've talked about work, there was a sort of a unifying idea. So like in the 19th century, the idea of success was defined as something that grew out of your values, right? Your virtue, right? Early to bed, early to rise, right? Sort of that kind of what we might think of as the Ben Franklin or Poor Richard idea. And then it was Dale Carnegie, more or less almost exactly a century ago, who then flipped it and that said, success, or the way to think about work, was about personality, was about marketing, like how to win friends and influence people, like the patter, like your resume, right? We're going to get into all of this tonight, but that became the dominant idea. And what's actually going on in academic career studies now is this idea of what has come to be called narrative career construction. Okay, the idea that your work life is something that you construct, but this has not burst out of a very, very, very kind of small academic area into the public discourse, which is really where it belongs, to finally bring the idea of storytelling to the heart of what it is that is so central to who we are, what we do all day.
I loved reading through stories in both books, and I this is sort of an offshoot question, but I can't help it. Did you have a favorite interview or an interview that just hit you the hardest of these 400 some interviews you did?
Well, I think of, two interviews come to mind when you said that. The first, I would say, from Life is in the Transitions, is this story of someone who turned out to be from my hometown, whom I didn't know, somebody who never liked school, and who did everything she could to play hooky, who ends up the summer before her senior year getting pregnant and then dropping out of school and choosing to marry the father of her child. And then they set off in this journey. They had to change churches because this was a scandal at the time. And she had 1, 2, 3 children, one after the other. And she was running a paper route, and her husband was working at a fast food restaurant. And then he got sick, and she was like, we're one meal, one paycheck, away from stumbling out of the middle class. And then so she decides to go back to school, and she earns her undergraduate degree. She earns a master's degree, and then she earns a PhD. And now she trains young people how it is, non-traditional students, to enter the educational world. And she said to me, I wouldn't change it. If I love my children, but I wouldn't have been able to go on this academic journey that results in her getting a doctorate degree if it had not been for this nonlinear life. So I think that's kind of a treasured story. And I will tell you the story that comes to mind from the search, which, as you know, is in the introduction to the search. And in 400 interviews, it may have been the single hardest one for me to persuade someone to do. And when I tell you the story, you'll recognize why. She was recommended to me by someone, and we had to have several conversations. She had to get clearance from her employer. And the story is, her name is Miroy Park. And she grew up in a first-generation Korean-American home in the upper Northwest. And she was expected to be a doctor or a scientist. In fact, her father gave her, for her 16th birthday, a chemistry textbook of all romantic things. And she was drawn to public service. So she came east for college. And then she said, as she said to me in our conversation, I picked the name brand. She joined the CIA. And she was placed on the Soviet desk, which at the time that she did it was the elite desk in espionage. And while there, she said, I feel like I can make a better contribution on the management side, on essentially the bureaucratic side. So she leaves the elite espionage desk to run payroll, like one of the least sexy jobs at the entire agency. And through a series of twists and turns, including a marriage, living overseas, having 2 children, taking naps, in the cafeteria during lunchtime. She ends up running the entire CIA, the first Asian American woman to have that job. And what I love about that story is 2 things. Number one, she makes what it turns out almost everybody makes in the course of their work lives, something that feels like the unright choice, right? It disappoints somebody. Like it is against the script of what you expect. But what seems like the unright choice becomes the right choice for that person. And the other thing I like, I may even be able, I won't look down at my phone, but she sends me an email last Tuesday on publication day as we're having this conversation. The book isn't out an hour. And she sends me an email at 9 a.m. last Tuesday morning. I'm literally on Times Square on Good Morning America, just having gotten off set with George Stephanopoulos. And I received this email from Roy Park saying, I trusted you. I was scared. I haven't slept in a week in anticipation of this book coming out. And I'm sitting here crying on the subway because it made me feel in a small way that maybe I have made a difference in my work life, and maybe I'll be able to inspire someone else to make a difference in theirs.
Oh my. Wow, that's powerful. One of your provocative early chapters is called The 3 Lies of Work. And I remember looking at that chapter and saying, all right, let's see what we got here. Could you outline the 3 lies of work, and let's talk about that for a minute?
I didn't set out like the idea with transitions. I didn't set out looking for transitions, and with this book, I did not set out looking for what I've come to call the 3 lies and 1 truth about work. But I've come to feel it quite strongly. So lie number 1 is you have a career. It turns out for most of human history, there was no word for career, and there was no need for a word for career. Most people lived where they worked and worked where they lived. Okay, 90% of people spent 90% of their time farming, and they did everything else, right? They made their own candles, they took care of their sick, and they chopped their own wood and grew their own food and did their own laundry. So there was no idea for a career. The idea of a career is literally invented a century ago in Boston by a guy named Frank Parsons, because what happens is, as you know, Carter, is a huge, I actually did, I'll interrupt myself again to say, I was on Fox Business News today, and I was asked a similar question. I know what I was asked. I was told 4,000 people last month lost their job to AI. How are we going to ever recover in the face of AI? And what I said live on Fox Business today was, in the late 19th century, when the automobile and advanced farming techniques were invented, 1/3 of the country lost their job. And what happened is all these people fled rural areas to cities, and then tens of millions more came from overseas. And suddenly you had a bunch of new jobs that had never existed, and all these people without work. So this guy named Frank Parsons literally invents the field of career counseling. And the idea was, once in your life at 21, if you were a male, they would match you to an occupation, and you would do that for the next 50 years. Okay. And every way that we've talked about, career since has been linear. Okay. You have a career track. Okay. You have a corporate ladder. Okay. The resume, which is invented 50 years later, is a successive linear string. Each job is supposed to be greater than the last job. Okay. The problem is that nobody lives that way anymore. Okay. And you were supposed to make decisions based on what looked best on your resume, what was best for your career track. So what does that mean? No taking time off to be with a family, no taking time off, if you get sick, no taking time off to serve your country or start a business that might fail. It's all linear and it's all progressive. And if you break from that, you were deeply stigmatized. So that is not true anymore. That's lie number 1. That leads to lie number 2. You have a path. Okay. My data show that the average person goes through 20 of what I call workquakes in the course of your lives. Okay, that's 1 on average every 2.5 years. So what is a workquake? A workquake is a jolt, right? Or some disruption, either in which you are forced to, or you choose to rethink or reimagine what you do. Okay, so an involuntary workquake might be you have a conflict with your boss, right? Or your company shuts down, or you get laid off. But there's also voluntary workquakes under which you decide to make a change, right? Or you have a child and you said you want to spend time off, or your mother's going through chemo and you decide that you want to, prioritize that. And that's the new reality. And here's, I think, what's interesting about this, Carter. Women go through workquakes more frequently than men. Xers go through them more than boomers, millennials more than Xers, diverse workers more than non-diverse workers, okay? And so now, for the first time in 2019, the majority of people hired in this country were diverse workers led by Black and brown women. So as the workforce becomes younger, more female, more diverse, the number of workquakes is only going to increase. And here, I should say, is what I think, I'm banging on the computer to grab my book. Here is what I think is the signature piece of data in this entire book. And that is 45% of workquakes begin in the workplace, as we were just talking about. Something happens and you renegotiate your job or go get a new job or lose your job or whatever it might be. But that means that the majority of workquakes, 55%, occur outside of the workplace. Something happens with your family, something happens with your health, something happens and you change your mind. And so it gets to what was your first question. In the battle between life and work, life is playing a greater role. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on. This is why study after study, Gallup, the number one thing for millennials and Gen Z is well-being. Deloitte, balance is the most important thing. Salary and money comes in third, only 1 in 4. 60% of millennials say that meaningful work is more important to them than their boomer parents. This offends a lot of people. I think it scares a lot of people, but it is the change. Life is more important in work than it has ever been before, which is why a quality of life, a job that gives you a quality of life, is so epically important, and that's the massive change that we're all confronting.
Bruce, before we get to the third one, what's driving this search for meaning? Did you get at that for younger people to be so meaning oriented? Is it a luxury that they have that maybe we didn't have in a different generation?
That's a very interesting question. I think that I'll make two analogies with religion, if I might, right? As you and I have a shared interest in religion, and as you know, I've written 5 books about this, right? Walking the Bible and Abraham, and a book about Moses called America's Prophet, and on and on. And if you look at the numbers, right, religiosity has declined, right? But an idea that I'm very that registers with me is that a lot of people might have been sort of, shall we say, non-believers in the past, but it was not acceptable to admit this in public, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. If you're a lawyer or a doctor or run a small shop, you almost had to go for most of the last 200 years. You almost had to go to a religious institution if you wanted commerce, right? You couldn't not be there. So I think a lot of this is that people may have been unhappy in work in the past, and it was too stigmatizing to step off the path, to get off of the ladder, because it would affect your ability to survive. Another thing about religion, I think that's incredibly important here, is that religion, particularly religion in the West, deserves a huge amount of, shall we say, responsibility for the idea that work should be miserable. Let's just go back to Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, what is their punishment? Work. That's specifically what it says. So this idea that work is misery, right? If you look at the Latin and Greek words, it's like torture and suffering, travail, right? And trabajo in Spanish. These are all, it's like toil, it's burdensome. So this has been an idea that has been around for a very long time. And this pushback, there's a lot of factors, but I think the biggest factor is that people want to do better. Like, what's the great American idea? Each generation wants to do better than the prior generation. As I don't have to tell you, we're coming off of a generation where the wealth creation, where real estate escalation in value is unprecedented in the history of humanity. For a lot of millennials and Gen Z, their ability to do better than their parents financially is actually challenged. So I think one of the reasons that that this idea of meaningful work has taken over is this is how they can do better than their parents. They can have more quality of life. You know, we'll get into this, I'm sure, but the second half of my book is a series of questions for how to tell your work story. And the first question I asked of what I call now these 21 questions to find work you love. The first question I asked was, tell me the upsides or the values of work that you learned from your parents. Let me ask you, Carter, tell me the upsides of work that you upsides of work that you learned from your parents.
From my parents, thriftiness, integrity, being probably the number one was being productive. My dad always talked about, I just want you to be productive.
Work hard, you know,
work hard,
sweat. Okay. So I'm asking people, like, I ask questions for a living, you know, and I always say that the only metric for a question is the quality of the answer. So I would ask people, and more or less everybody, it turned out when we crunched the numbers, it was 67, 2/3 of people say the number one value they learned from their parents was the value of hard work. Yeah. And actually I got a little, I don't know, for lack of a better word, bored with the answers. I'm like, there's something I'm missing. So then I started asking people, what was the prominent downside of work you learned from your parents? So let me ask you that. What's the prominent downside or shadow of work that you learned from your parents?
Time away from family.
Bingo. So the number one here, the answers were more common. Number one answer, overwork. Okay. Number two answer, strain on the family. Number three, work, happiness. Okay. Unhappiness in this case was the downside. So to me, this is fascinating. We're like one question into this, and what it shows is that we all have this story. I call it your internal scripture about work that we're carrying around that we never talk about. And that is a story that infuses work today. I want to work hard. I have learned the value of hard work, but I am not prepared to overwork, sacrifice my family, or be unhappy. That's the whole story right there in that one question.
Well, these observations are certainly playing out as I teach at Kellogg. These students are 27 to 29, and I think what you said is verbatim. They want meaningful work, and they don't want to sacrifice having a rich life to just grind it all the way up to the top.
You know, and I think what's interesting for a place like Kellogg and elite business schools like it, right, is I don't know, what's the male-female breakdown at
well, it's about 45% women now.
Right. So what's interesting,
going up,
right, because another thing that's going on, another massive change that's going on that undergirds this is that if you go back, say, to the 1950s and 60s, right, when you and I were growing up, imbibing these lessons about work from our culture, there was still a gender divide both in work and in family. Right. Yeah. So what's happened now is you've got, I think the number is now 78% of women who are working outside the home, and a similar shift is going on in the family space. So you have many more dads involved in parenting. So that change of women working and men parenting has helped to scramble all of these rules. And the pandemic only accelerated this when everybody was stuck at home for a while and had to scramble with child rearing and family management and the like. So the normal sort of, a membrane that divided work from life has become much more porous in the last generation.
And Bruce, along with that porous is your third lie, yes, which is you have a job. And this to me was fascinating, the number that you quoted, 3.5 jobs.
Yeah, first of all, that was an excellent transition back to the third lie. So the third lie is you have a job. And on the surface, this is the most absurd sounding of the lies. Like, of course I have a job. Like, how else do I pay the bills? But remember, I grew up, and I don't know if you read this book when you were young, but I grew up on the Richard Scarry what do people do all day, right? And so that's like, the little lowly worm goes around, and there's like the, the cat that's the baker and the pig that's the barber, and like everybody, they're traditionally gendered and everybody has one role and they go home at night. That's not how people live anymore. Turns out no one has just one job anymore. We have up to 5 jobs. So what are the 5 jobs? The first is what we might call a main job. Although even that is challenging, and by some measures, only 50% of us even have a main job anymore. I'm thinking of this woman, Sonia Gutierrez from Arkansas. Like, she's the first statewide elected city council woman, Hispanic woman in the history of the state. She teaches computers. She has a salsa company, called Salsa for Change. Like, she's got like 4 side jobs, that she does. So there's a main job. Okay. Then there is a care job, like caring for, children or caring for aging relatives. 2/3 of us have one of those. 75% of us have a side job, which is something that we talk about a lot. But there's 2 other jobs, frankly, that I kept hearing about so often that I decided to name. The first is what I call a hope job. So a hope job is work that you do that you hope leads to something else, like podcasting, right? Or selling pickles at the farmer's market, or writing a screenplay. It turns out that 89% of us have a hope job. And then the last job is work that we do that haunts us, that's invisible, that's like a time suck. It could be battling self-doubt or imposter syndrome. It could be battling mental health or sobriety. It could be battling discrimination or bigotry. And 93% of us have a ghost job. And when I ask people, a lot of people say they're every minute of the day they're thinking about it. But when I tried to quantify it, 12 hours a week, people are dedicating to their hope job. To their ghost job. So on the surface, this idea that you have multiple jobs seems like a burden, right? It's back to this idea that Americans work so hard, right? And I get that, and I'm sensitive, because some of these jobs we do for money, right? Because you need to replace the tires, or in my case, I'm about to send 2 kids to college, right? So I'm sensitive to that. But a lot of them, like the hope job, we pay out of pocket for because we would like it to lead to something else. And so why are we doing this? It gets back to the theme of this conversation, because the one thing that's not negotiable is you want meaning. So if perhaps your main job you're doing for the salary or the benefits, maybe the side job and the hope job you're doing for meaning. And then maybe it flips, because like I talked to this guy, Sang Kim, who is who also an East Asian immigrant, right? Who did what his parents wanted him to do, went to law school, became a lawyer at Goldman Sachs, right? Like an elite job. But he grew up sharing a bedroom with his sisters, and even worse, sharing a bathroom. So he grew up to wanting to be an interior designer and fix other people's bathrooms. And so while he's at Goldman Sachs, he starts a side job of this company, and then he decides to make the leap, but he's still not ready. So his main job is now the interior design company, but he has a side job taking some clients to pay for money. And that's exactly how we do it. At different times in our lives, for different reasons, we use these different jobs to cobble together the meaning that is the one thing that's non-negotiable.
Bruce, a good book is on this topic of multiple jobs is called Little Bets by Peter Sims. He talks about this process of testing the waters on different fronts through consulting and through shadowing people and through being an intern and, like you say, your hope job and these. And I think that I advise students to read that, because to your point, they're always looking for what else can give them meaning. And this little bets approach, it's like building a prototype and putting it into a test market. It's like these little tests, but the product you're testing is yourself.
It's like this. It's like the core. A big little small bets is maybe a little bets. You call it little bets is a cousin of the sort of the great behavioral scientific idea of small wins, right?
Yes.
Small wins, can build momentum. Small bets, because you want to take these risks, if you will, when the stakes are low, because then you can learn and you can grow, and maybe your hope job isn't ready to become your side job or your main job, so you experiment. And that's exactly what happens I think relevant to your students with entrepreneurship, right? So the data is very clear. Hudson Sessions, I do it from the University of Oregon, has this data that most entrepreneurship things begin in this way. But here's what's interesting, right? Is that one of the undercurrents that won't be, perhaps part of the conversation tonight, is that a lot of employers, right? We are in this, what I call the meaning moment. And the essence of the search is like how you can find the meaning, and I'm sure we'll turn to that next, about how what is the one truth of how you can find meaningful work for yourself. But the other people who need to reckon with the meaning moment is organizations and leaders. And organizations, almost to a person, find this idea of side jobs and well, Hope Jobs is new, although I have to say, it's been twice in the Wall Street Journal in the last week. Once because they ran an excerpt of this book, and then once as you may have seen last week, this incredibly favorable review of the search that came out last week. And so I feel like these ideas are going to get out there. But the data on side jobs is, if you do a side job that is similar to your main job, it will undermine your performance, right? So if you work in a printing company and you are, calligraphing wedding invitations, that may undermine it. But if you work in a printing company and you're a DJ, right, or run a karaoke company, right, or selling jewelry on Etsy, it will enhance your performance. Why will it enhance your performance? Because you'll be more satisfied and more fulfilled and less resentful of your main job, because you got this other thing that's helping you get meaning. And so employers as well as employees should embrace this meaning moment and the way it can transform work.
I love it. So, well, I have a whole line of questions around motivation that I can't get to, looking at, oh my gosh, I'm just going to stop on that. Motivation theory is fascinating to me, and this starts getting into motivation theory, but I want to make sure we cover what I think was the center of the book. And I loved reading this section of the book. That is the meaning audit. You said in an effort to find meaningful work, you propose doing a meaning audit. And then you're quite precise in these 6 steps of a meaning audit. Would you explain what the meaning audit? I mean, I'm going to start using this with students, this framework, this construct. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, it's already being taught at Stanford, and I would be delighted to have Kellogg join the party and share some ideas with your students. So here's how I would say it. Ever since Benjamin Franklin, walked up the streets of Philadelphia, a poor man, and walked out 30 years later, a rich celebrity, we have been telling one story of success. And it's all about climbing. Up by your bootstraps, rags to riches, higher floor, bigger office, greater salary, more benefits. Climb, 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 climb. The one thing I learned, or the number one thing I learned, is that the people who are happiest and most fulfilled in what they do, they don't just climb, they also dig. They perform a meaning audit. They do what I call personal archaeology, excavating, going on this like treasure hunt in your own life story and excavating, what you learned from your parents. Who were your earliest role models? What was that thing that has nagged at you your entire life? I call it your toothache. Like, what?
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you what your toothache was.
Okay, ask me that later, because let me just stick with this, because this is exactly the point. We have these things within us, and they are speaking to us. They are haunting us. They are whispering to us. And what is it that the story that you have been wanting to tell your whole life? It is fundamentally a story. And the way, to invoke this, because we've been, it's you, Carter, you're getting me to do this. It's like I've been preaching here a bit, but I will use it in the words, the way I actually think about it, which is that we have been handed a script about work by our culture, that this is what you should do. Okay, get on the should train, right? And this is what you are expected to do. These are the external, back to your motivation, the external metrics of success and achievement. But we also have this scripture, right? This mix of like stories and parables and ideas and incomplete thoughts and homilies and that just live inside us and have been trailing us our own life. And the people who are happiest manage to silence the script and elevate the scripture. And the only way to do that is through an act of intentionality, of digging, exploring, excavating, unearthing this story you have been trying to tell for years, maybe decades. There's a wonderful, and that's the one truth, only you can tell your story. And I interviewed a guy named Mark Savickas, who more or less invented this field. And he said to me, we all have, he calls it your unknown known that is deep inside of you. And he said, it's so memorable to me. He said, when I meet somebody and they say in career counseling, like, what should I do? He said, I usually know within 5 minutes, but it's not my job to tell them. It is my job to help them know that they already know it and get it out of them where it already lives inside. Love that idea. So what the whole second half of my book is, I call it 21 Questions to Find Work You Love. What that is based on is a process that has been proven academically that can help you figure out whether you are a new college grad, a new parent, a new retiree, what is the story that you want to tell, and then go tell it.
Well, this is asking a lot because we got about 10 minutes here, 12 minutes. You go excavate the past, probe the present, and construct the future. Can you talk a little bit about each stage, especially I found so useful, the constructing the future question format you went through?
Right. So, okay. So what, by the way, a quick 20 seconds on the difference between happiness and meaning. Happiness is a present-oriented emotion, right? Animals can be happy, but only humans can have meaning, because humans have the capacity to stitch together past, present, and future, right? It's easy when you're happy, but what happens when you're unhappy? Meaning allows you to find identity and strength and calmness when you are unhappy. And it's stitching together past, present, and future. And what is the human mechanism for doing that? It's a story. So that's the ultimate. So a third of the questions are about the past. We did one. What were the upsides and downsides you learned from your parents? Since you asked me about toothache, I'll do it. So my favorite question in the millions I've asked as a professional questioner and storyteller, I read this fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen right before I started this book. It's called Auntie Toothache. And it's about a young boy. It's the last, clearly Andersen, and he has a toothache. I mean, he has a toothache problem, but he loves words. And his aunt says to him, you have a way with words. You're going to be a great poet. And one night he's in a toothache-y, delirious dream, and he's visited by an older woman whom he calls Auntie Toothache. And Auntie Toothache says to him, every great poet has a great toothache. And to say that I crazy love this, Carter, I could literally live my life asking people the rest of your life, did you have a toothache as a child, and what was it? And when you ask that question, it would be, inequality. It would be injustice, right? It would be escape. It would be, I wanted to be happy because I grew up in an unhappy family, whatever it is. Mary Robinson, 11 years old. Her father dies. She's told, you don't mourn, okay? You have to buck up, stiff upper lip, and go forward. She spirals out of control. She then goes and is so interested in fleeing, she becomes a flight attendant. Then she goes to work for a Fortune 50 size company, Prudential. She's deeply unhappy. She has a fight with her mother one night in her 40s, lies in her childhood bedroom and realizes, I never mourned my father. She leaves her job and she now started and runs an organization to help children and families grieve the loss of a loved one. She had figured out her why. She had figured out her toothache. So that's a simple question. What's your toothache as a child? Then you turn to the present. And let's just take one question, right? I'm in a moment in my life when, okay? I'm in a moment in my life when I need to make money, right? Because I got to pay off my student loans, right? Or buy a house, or as I said earlier, I think, I'm about to send 2 children to college. Or I'm in a moment in my life when I have young children, okay? Or I have a parent I need to move to assisted living. I need flexibility, okay? I'll turn down the job that forces me to travel or the promotion that I might like. I know I can come back in a couple of years, but right now I want to focus on my family. Or I'm in a moment in my life where I've been doing the same thing for a really long time. Okay. I've been working at the job and, working for the man, right? And now I want to give back. I want to fight, I want to get involved in politics. I want to improve my community and run for office. I want to work in climate change. As you know, I talked to a CEO of an ad tech company in Silicon Valley, Walk, okay, sitting at the top of the company, at the top of a growing
Oh,
field.
this is cool.
And he goes and he sees his wife drags him against his will on a Saturday to see the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth. And he quits his job to become a foot soldier at the bottom of the pyramid in climate change, because he says, I would look myself in the mirror and say, what am I doing to save my planet today? And when I was, fidgeting about how big a font should be, I'm wasting my life. So he quits his job and he just ran for political office in California. So I'm at a moment in my life when, and that leads toward the future. And as you say, I have a series of questions with, fill in the blank. And since we're talking about meaning, a very simple one is, my purpose right now is blank. You want a meaningful life? Have you asked yourself? And that leads to maybe my favorite one of all, Carter, which is, the best advice I have for myself right now is blank. When you ask people, as I did, what was the best advice you got? 3/4 of people say the best advice I got was trust yourself. You already know the answer. People don't want to kick in the butt or a slap in the face. They want a pat on the back. You know the answer. Trust yourself. Tell the story that your body, that your mind, that voice inside of you is already telling.
Wow. One thing I wanted to ask you, when you talked about probing the present in this process of the meaning audit, you have the ABCs of meaning. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it. Can you talk about what those ABCs are and the sequence of them that makes a big difference in how you ascribe meaning?
Yeah, I did a podcast earlier today with the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, and he was saying that, in this space, part of the challenge is that meaning seems kind of soft and squishy, right, to a lot of people, right? There's a reason that in most businesses, the employee well-being office 5 years ago was in the basement next to the incinerator in a windowless concrete building, right? But now, as I don't have to tell you, every office, every floor has to be infused with this conversation of meaning. So what is meaning, right? My wife likes to say that I have hard knowledge about soft things. Okay, so meaning is a soft thing. What is meaning? This is the thing that's been the hardest in coding these stories, but to me is one of the biggest revelations. So if you go back, a century ago, most people had to live where their parents wanted them to live, do what their parents wanted them to do, believe what their parents wanted them to believe, love who their parents wanted them to love. Now, that ain't true anymore. You can do what you want to do, live where you want to live, believe what you want to be, love who you want to love. But that scares a lot of us, right? In effect, we get writer's block trying to write the story of our lives. So how do we manage this? We manage this through what I call the ABCs of meaning. These are the 3 levers that we push and pull. So the A is agency. What is agency? That's what you do, you make, you create, your sense of autonomy. For many of us, it is our work. Okay, in narrative terms, I think of this as your me story. The B is belonging. Okay, that's your relationships, your love. That could be your family. That could be, your neighborhood. That could be your colleagues. That could be your co-religionists. That could be the people on your tennis team or that you march in protests with, whatever it might be. So your belonging, that in narrative terms is your we story, right? You have your me story, now your we story. And then the C is a cause, a calling, a purpose, something higher than yourself, right? So that, in narrative terms is our the story. So you ask the question is, so what happens in the course of our lives? We all have all 3 within us. Like, I'm an ABC, like I'm a writer, I'm very agentic, I'm a super involved family member, very involved dad. I would say cause is less important to me. I'm married, my wife, Linda Rotenberg, started and runs an organization that supports high impact entrepreneurs, in the rest of the world. She's very cause oriented. She's a CEO, so she's very agentic. And I would say outside of family, belonging relationships aren't that important to her, right? So, but what happens is in the course of our lives, we kind of shape shift, I call it. So maybe we've been working really hard and we want to spend more time with our family. Or maybe we've been caring for children or an aging relative, and we say, you know, I'm tired of that. I want to do something for myself now. Or maybe we've been giving back and we get burned out and we say, you know what, I want to relax and write a memoir or do something like that. So in transitions, we shape and kind of readjust who we are and what we do. So just as life is nonlinear, the sources of meaning in our lives are nonlinear, which is why the essence of this sort of narrative approach to work is whenever you go through a workquake, every whatever it is, 2.5 years, you need to revisit your story. This is the problem with the career. It's not something you knew at 21. When I ask people, did you follow your passion, discover your passion, or make your passion? Only 10% of people followed their passion because your passions change. Okay, what 21-year-old can anticipate what they're going to think? I got cancer as a 43-year-old adult man, right? It changed my priorities. You know, the climate change wasn't something anyone discussed 10 years ago, no less 25, for Wei Tai Kwok to now go devote himself to this. So our lives are nonlinear. Your sources of meaning are nonlinear. So whenever you're in a workquake, and let's be clear, 100 million Americans are in a workquake right now, which is why 75% of people say they want to look for new work this year. It's why 70% of Americans are unhappy. It's why 50 million people have quit a job in the last year, not laid off, not fired, quit. That's a third of the workforce. 100 million Americans are in a workquake. They're going to sit down with someone they love today, tonight, this summer, and say, honey, I'm not happy with what I'm doing, and I want to do something that makes me happy. So in that moment, that's when you need to ask these 21 questions to identify what is your meaning today.
Well, having read, I don't know how many hundreds of books around career, this is the best tool, these series of questions that I have read. And I will be offering it to my students because it's rich and it's thoughtful. And I love you using story as the way to do this excavation. It's so sensible. It makes so much sense. One last question. Can I give you one hard one? And I think Lonnie might be coming in soon, but I'm going to try to get it in. You close by talking about the American dream.
Yeah.
Right. You found in your research that nearly 2/3 of the people you interviewed said that they think we need to rethink the American dream. How might you think that we rethink the American dream?
I love that finding, actually, because I asked people, should we celebrate it? Should we kill it? Right? Or should we rethink it? And the vast majority said rethink it. I was a little surprised that it was that robust. So, you know, I'll offer what I think are four metrics, the 4 metrics at the end of this book to redefine success. Okay. Number 1, success is not climbing. Success is digging. We've discussed that. You've got to go to your question about motivation. Stop chasing someone else's dream. Start chasing your own dream. Identify what is it that brings you meaning. What is your definition of success? Success is not climbing. Success is digging. Success is not individual. It's collective. I met this amazing story of this guy who was on the next to last helicopter with his family to get out of Vietnam, and he was on a ship that was taken hostage, and they were left afloat in the Pacific, and they were rescued a week later by the U.S. government, and he was sent to resettle in Arizona. His father was blind. His mother was working and taking care of his dad. He had to take care of his children, and he said, I resented it. My parents said, you got to go be a doctor or a lawyer because that's what the Asian dream was. And he's like, but that was not my dream. He became a school teacher because he wanted to be the mentor that he lacked as a child, and then became the first Vietnamese American elected to the school board in Alhambra, California. So success, and he said to me, no story of success is an individual story. It's always a shared story. And that's not the story we've been telling. Success is not individual, it's collective. Success is not means, success is a meaning, okay? You might be at a moment in your life where money and salary and net worth are important, and that might mean freedom or providing for your family or self-confidence, but almost no one is that what navigates them the entire time. And for a lot of people, they go through periods or devote their whole lives to self-expression, or giving back or public service. Success is not means, it's meaning. And for too long, we've said it's only means. And then the last one is success is not status. Success is story. You tell your story. Don't listen to anyone else. And in effect, when I'm inviting people on this search is, if you or someone wants purpose but doesn't know how to get it because that's not the way we've talked about work, you come on this journey across America with me. First of all, you'll be crazy inspired by these people and these individual stories. And then I think you'll be motivated to go out, find your purpose and achieve the happiness you seek, the meaning you crave, and the success you deserve on your own terms.
Bruce, thank you for a wonderful book and the opportunity to talk with you about it.
Thank you, Carter. Godspeed. That was beautiful.
Yeah, ditto. Bruce, we're such big fans of yours. You just really, you lay it out. You're the whole package. The narrative arcs. Your wife is correct. You tell. Say it one more time. You have the what?
I have hard knowledge about soft things.
Thank you.
I think it's awesome.
Sounds like she has a great turn of phrase as well. Carter, thank you so much for an excellent interview. I knew in my gut was right. There we go. I knew it would be a great match. And I know also deeply meaningful for you as well to have this opportunity.